Let's do this. The Cult of Hockey podcast by the faithful and for the faithful. I'm David Staples of the Edmonton Journal, and I'm here today with Bruce McCurdy. Hey, Bruce.
Hey, David. How you doing today?
Good draft day. The Oilers have made their pick. Bo Akey. Bo Akey.
But more on the TV.
Okay, they probably got that right. They know.
And break the heart.
Yeah. Hope not.
I'm kidding.
And there was a trade, Bruce, of sorts. More of a poison pill being swallowed by the Edmonton Oilers, which happens if you give a contract to a player and it doesn't work out. There's a poison pill. Sometimes they're big and sometimes they're little. This strikes me as more of a small poison pill. But the Oilers moved Kailer, Yamamoto, and Klim Kostin to Detroit for future considerations.
Whatever that means, usually nothing.
So the reason I say that's a poison pill is I think Kostin may have had some value, and that was he's the sweetener in the deal.
Absolutely.
He's the sweetener. So because you have to add a sweetener, that's a poison pill. Now, he doesn't have a ton of value unless you have the cap space to sign him quickly, which Detroit may well. They do have the cap space to sign him. And Bruce, aside from anything else, Klim Kostin has value. He is a people are just writing it off. Well, this is the price of business and moving on Yamamoto and blah, blah, blah. But let's not skip over the fact the Oilers just had to get rid of a player who has got potential as a two-way power forward in the NHL, who made a huge impact on the Oilers this past year, who is this major fan favorite, who hits, who fights, who can skate, who scored some goals last year. And I know some people are down on him because of, the old shooting percentage thing, that he was on a hot shooting streak, which is fair enough. But even if he had scored fewer goals, what he provided to the Oilers was significant. And in the playoffs, Bruce, he was a force in the playoffs. He was, in terms of being a two-way winger, he was solid on defense, and he added to the attack in limited minutes. This is a real loss for the Oilers. And I think that's the first thing we should all note here is because of the Oilers' salary cap and Kostin's maybe exorbitant salary demands. Which is also a factor here.
Yes, absolutely.
They couldn't reach an agreement with this player, and it's a tough day for the Oilers in that way, and that they're losing to the Detroit Red Wings or maybe some other KHL team or where Kostin ends up. They're losing a darn good and very promising hockey player.
Well, they're losing two 24-year-old full-time NHLers in return for nothing other than cap space, which is the be-all and end-all in the modern NHL. And, there's just no room for mistakes. When you sign a guy coming off a 20-goal season, 23 years old, to a 2-year deal, you don't expect him to bomb out so completely in the first year that you're going to move on. And he, to say he bombed out, he had injury issues, and that also obviously makes him harder to trade. But he did score almost a point every other game last year. He was plus 12. Kostin was plus 12. These are outscoring players for Edmonton, and they're just going to have to replace them with cheaper players. And ideally, well, they won't get cheaper than Kostin, but they will be cheaper than what he's asking for, which is why they had to move Kostin. They just couldn't see their way to offering him the kind of extension that he clearly was looking for after his one good NHL season. And it's a harsh market out there. So they've got they've got a tiny bit more cap space. They gained none from moving on from Kostin, who was at NHL minimum last year, but they did gain something like $2.3 million by moving on from Yamamoto, assuming they replace him with an NHL minimum player. Right, like that's how much he made over the minimum was $2.3 million.
I see what you're saying.
And I always sort of make that equation. You got to replace the guy, so you got to subtract that amount out of whatever you're saving. But hopefully we won't have people turning around and say, well, now we can go out and sign another $3 million right winger or $5 million right winger or whatever, because they need the cap space to pay Evan Bouchard and Ryan McLeod. And whether this amount will be enough to get that done, I think there's certainly Holland's got a little bit of elbow room now in those negotiations, because they also gained this summer a $2.25 million out of dead cap that they no longer have to cope with from the Andrei Sekera buyout and the Milan Lucic retention. Both of those commitments expired at the end of last season. So between that and the Yamamoto move, now you're talking more like $5 million. And all they've done is subtract from last year's roster. There's nobody that really, no NHL players that have been added as yet. So they got, let's call it $5 more million than before. And that's a rough figure. There's always little things in the margins, like having to pay Evan Bouchard's bonuses from last year, for instance. But they are at least out of cap jail. And now Holland at least has a little bit of room to negotiate. So,
and sign Bouchard and McLeod.
Yeah, those are
the top priorities, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder why Kostin wasn't on that list as a top priority. Honestly, Bruce, like it strikes me. Like I understand. Like I remember the year Alex Chason had a good hot shooting year. And the Oilers signed him to a $2 million contract. Was it 1 year or 2 years?
2 years.
2 years. So I understand that, in that moment, Chason looked like he could really shoot the puck, didn't he? Because he shot and they went in. And so there's that illusion. I think it's fair to say with Kostin that he can really shoot the puck too. And he might be worth $2 million. And then he comes back next year and he scores 7 goals. And he's injured and maybe he doesn't even effective as a fighter and a checker, and everyone's disgruntled. So I get all that, but nonetheless, young player, willing, a hard hitting physical hockey player who can make plays with the puck and is willing to fight, stand up for his teammates. I just wonder why he wasn't on the list of priorities. I'm not sure that I get it. And I wonder, could you have bought out? Would it have made sense to buy out Warren Foegele or to trade Warren Foegele? Could you have traded? Maybe. Would he have been a better bet than Warren? Like Foegele at $2.75 million, get rid of him. Could you move him out for nothing? You'd get nothing back, right? But could you move him out and then have kept Klim Kostin? And would that have been a better bet for the team?
Well, not if he wants $2 million, though. You see, that's the thing. They can't afford a big rate. Like I had, frankly, David, at the beginning of the summer, I started off my season review with the priorities, Holland's priorities to sign, and I had them listed: Bouchard first post, McLeod second post, Kostin third post. They were all restricted free agents. All of them, ideally, you bring them back. Well, they sacrificed one because he wanted too much money. Well, we don't know what Bouchard and McLeod are asking for, but we can safely guess it's too much money, at least from Ken Holland's perspective of what he can afford.
Yeah.
And they've lost one of those players. That was such a great trade for Edmonton, but it was a great trade for 1 year, and then they just had to move on from this guy. And it's sad, Wasn't he over 2 points per 60?
You wouldn't have traded Foegele to keep Kostin? No?
Well, not if I then had to pay Kostin $2 million, because then I'm still in cap jail.
Okay, fair enough. And we also don't know this. So there is an opening in the top 6 now, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yamamoto's gone. There's an opening. Who's going to fill it? So the candidates are Raphael Lavoie was a 25 goal scorer, I think, in the AHL last year. Came on strong, big 22-year-old winger. He's mean. Like he's not a bad candidate actually to fill Kostin's spot. Like to be like what Klim Kostin brought to the Oilers. Raphael Lavoie, if he'd made up his mind, he's going to be that player. He could be that player next year who comes in and scores, in fourth line duty, scores 10, 11 goals, takes some fights, is physical, hits people. I mean, he has that in him. He's 6'4", 220. He's mean. He's not. They're different players. I think Lavoie actually has more skill as an attacker. In fact, I heard him mentioned yesterday think Mark Spector mentioned on Oilers Now is Klim Kostin, or excuse me, Raphael Lavoie being a potential someone for the top six.
Next
so
year?
There's him. Yeah, next year. So there's him. There's Holloway. There's him, and there's Holloway. And what we don't know is a player like Connor Brown, right? Who's been rumored to be considering Edmonton. And Brian Lawton, the former player agent at NHL GM, said, if he was Connor Brown's agent or that kind of, knowing what he knows, and he didn't have perfect knowledge of Connor Brown's situation, but knowing what he knows of the player,
right.
he said Connor Brown's someone who should bet on himself and come to Edmonton on a riskier deal rather than sign a 3-year deal for $3 or $4 million each. Come to Edmonton, bet on yourself, and then get more money. So, that was interesting. Maybe there's something that we don't know. Maybe there's Connor Brown's in the works for that second line role. And so losing Kostin. But I think actually Bruce Kostin wasn't crazy thinking to think that Klim Kostin might be able to step up into the top 6 for a year and provide something, because the guy, and
he could have bet on himself
player.
too, and in this environment where he's found a team where he fits after not doing so well in St. Louis in that department apparently. But I don't know, the Oilers and the Oilers' success with Russians, even when they get one that seems to be working out, they give them away for nothing. That's obviously oversimplification, but that's what it feels like.
Yeah. What did they get for Bo Mironov back in the day? They got Ethan Morrow, didn't they? Yeah.
They got, that was a big package from Chicago. They got Dean McCammond out of that deal, and they got 3 or 4 guys back for Bo. So they've had good Russians in the distant past. They just haven't had much success with them in recent years, to say the least.
I'm super disappointed. And of course, so we also lost an NHL player, as you say, in Kailer Yamamoto. Now, I don't think, based on the way he's played overall for the Edmonton Oilers, that Kailer Yamamoto is a top 6 player on the Edmonton Oilers. I think, though, he's a good third line player on the Edmonton Oilers. And if only he was making, $1.5 million, he would have been worth keeping, because he is a good third line player. He's a good checker. He can score some goals. It would have been wonderful to have him at that amount of money. But the NHL really is all about the cap. Yep. It's about what you're making compared to what you do and how you fit on the team. And it is let's just deal with this now. It's a sad day. There's news out of Carolina that Puljujarvi is going to have double hip surgery. This follows up on his. So this is a guy with all kinds of potential as a hockey player, who suddenly his demise with the Oilers, he was a strong player, Bruce, in 21-22. He looked like he was going to be a top 6 forward. And then all of a sudden we see this sudden demise in him, and people were wondering what it was about again. Was it long COVID, for instance, or was it some other injury? Well, the some other injury factor seems to be exhibit, that's the answer. He's obviously got major hip problems. This is the second time that he's had this surgery. Listen, his career as a hockey player, it sounds like it's in doubt to me at this point. And it's too bad. Both he and Yamamoto, all kinds of people love these players in oil country. Kailer Yamamoto, my wife's favorite player. Puljujarvi, we both really liked that player. All kinds of people, Dustin Nielsen was, famous for his support of Puljujarvi. We stuck with Puljujarvi even when he went to Finland, Bruce. We were not down on him at that point.
Well, that was the first time he had double hip surgery. Was at the end of his ELC. And remember that third season in Edmonton under Ken Hitchcock, and he just kept falling down for no apparent reason. And so he went home, he got that dealt with. He, came back, played a good solid year in the Finnish league, and he came back and looked like he was ready to roll. But whatever, if you've had the same, I'm not sure it's exact same surgery, but if you have to have your same body part operated on twice, especially if there's 2 of them in their core body, like your hips, I'm very sad for him. That's a crappy break for a young athlete, and it maybe explains a couple things, but it's a sad day that both of these $3 million this year right wingers that the Oilers drafted in consecutive drafts in the first round, two right wingers in a row, and they were just 4 months apart in age. And here we have sort of different denouements. I mean, Puljujarvi was already done as an Oiler, but now he seems to be done as an NHLer. And on the same day that we learned that Kailer Yamamoto is done as an Oiler, and Klim Kostin, who was another very popular player, David, is down the road as well. So Ken Holland's done the first part of his work, I guess, in sort of clearing stuff out, but now he's got to find players to replace these guys. And it's back to the drawing board in sense of now we need a scoring right winger and a depth forward with a little bit of toughness. You say Raphael Lavoie, and you say he can pick up a few fights. Well, to me that's a low priority, but he fought exactly once last year. And the one time he fought was when he got benched at the end of a period and chewed out by his coach, and he came out for the start of the next period. In the first shift, he grabbed the first Calgary Wrangler he could find and wrangled with him. And that was his one and only fight. So my thinking is it's not his norm to do that. He was way outside of his comfort zone in that. So I'm not looking for him to do any of that stuff. But if he's big and can use his size to get to the front of the net and win some battles in the corner, and the odd booming check. I mean, obviously you want to have some of that somewhere in your lineup, and Kostin did all of those things, so that's what they need to
when I
replace
said
that player.
when I said a few fights, I actually really did mean a few, meaning two. He just has to double his number. All you have to do, Bruce, is stand up for a teammate now and then.
Yeah, no, that's true. You got to do the Nuge.
Happened twice. Just like Nuge did it.
You got to do the Nuge. Just
that's right.
That guy just gooned my teammate. Grab him.
That's what I meant. But we do know from watching him in Sweden, he is a physical player. He is fierce, Raphael. Especially when he has the puck going to the net. Like that's when it comes out mostly in him. But he is a massive guy. He's a great big guy, and he is a nasty hockey player. Like he hacks, slashes, elbows his way to the net. So there's a lot to like in Raphael Lavoie. And this is the NHL, Bruce. This is what we have to get used to. And the good news is actually that the Oilers do have, they've lost Yamamoto. They've lost Kostin now. They lost Puljujarvi previously. But there's some good, Holloway and Lavoie are really good young hockey players who have a significant chance to step up and take a role in the top six. It's interesting though that with both, and it's so typical, hockey is a brutal physical battle. And Yamamoto and Puljujarvi weren't sunk. They're not sunk by a lack of talent or a lack of desire or a lack of compete or all these things. Both of these players, they are being sunk right now by injuries. Yes. And this is the story of the NHL. It's always been the story of the NHL. It's tough to take. It's hard to see, but this is how it goes. Like this is why they when they get paid a lot of money, Bruce. Mm-hmm. I'm not someone who sits there and resents it. I never have, because this is a tough way to make a living. And yeah, you get glory and you get well paid. Mm-hmm. You get physically battered as well. And you put yourself at great risk playing NHL hockey. So it's why we love it. It's, if it wasn't such an intense physical combat, it wouldn't be nearly as interesting. But there's a price that the players paid, and we just saw what happened with Puljujarvi and Yamamoto. And Holloway. I mean, he's the guy stepping up to replace
him. And Broberg. I mean, we've seen it with these young draft choices. Over and over again. I mean, I remember back to a young guy named Doug Lynch that the Oilers drafted out of Red Deer Rebels many years ago, and he really was looking like a great pick. Was coming on gangbusters in junior. I think he was on the Rebels team, or Rustlers team, that won the Rebels that won the Memorial Cup. But he did something to his wrist, and the Oilers wound up trading him as part of the deal that brought in Chris Pronger, the first CFP trade. that brought in Pronger and sent out Lynch and Wojciechowski and Brewer, and they were all promising guys, but the injuries completely wrecked that guy, and sometimes you never even get to see him. What they could have done because they get hurt before they ever get here. At least in the case of Puljujarvi and Yamamoto, they got their crack at it, and got a couple hundred games or more in at the NHL level. And I'm assuming Yamamoto will play with Detroit, and Kostin may or may not sign with Detroit. And meanwhile, Steve Yzerman, who fleeces Oilers for draft picks every time that they come to him for a rental, couldn't even cough up like a fifth or a seventh or anything at all for these two guys that he got today, and dealing with his old mentor, Ken Holland. So I don't know. I think Yzerman got the better of this one too, frankly, but he's obviously dealing in a different situation.
Bruce,
the teams with cap space are going to win player trades at cap space time. That's just the way it is.
If he gets Kostin signed, they have the cap space. If they get Kostin signed for a couple years, this could be a huge win for Detroit. He's just what every NHL team wants. I'm surprised there wasn't more of a market for him. I guess it's just so late in the game in terms of signing him, and maybe teams just don't want to take that risk. But if you have cap space, if you're not a very good team, if you were in Arizona or Chicago, or that's a guy. So this is why I say this is a poison pill. I actually think Kostin had some real value here. And they just had to swallow that pill to move out Yamamoto, and that's life in the NHL. We've seen, other teams are doing the same thing. Riley Smith, who was a useful winger for the Las Vegas Golden Knights, was traded for, what did they get back?
Third.
Not great value for him. Tyler.
Look at a third, and then they used the $5 million to sign Ivan Barbashev for 5 years. So they used the cap space on a different player. Plus, they got a third. So you could say, I'll tell you what, Vegas, they lead the world in the hockey world in lack of what's the word? Yeah, they did. It's on the tip of my tongue. Anyway, they got no problem getting rid of guys, right? And they've done a couple of real strange trades over the years. They traded Marc-Andre Fleury, franchise icon goalie Marc-Andre Fleury, for nothing. They just gave him away to just get his contract off the books. Then this year they gave away Max Pacioretty for
nothing.
Lack
of sentimentality?
That's the word. Sentimentality is the word. Thank you. And they traded Max Pacioretty for nothing. Right. And that's a guy that they gave up a whole hell of a lot to bring on in the first place. Nick Suzuki, among other things, was part of the price they paid to bring him on. And yet when the time came, they just moved on from the guy because they needed the cap space. And Vegas showed sort of this cold-blooded pursuit of cap space. I was thinking, well, they just, they're bringing on the sexy new available player, the shiny new guy, the way they went and got Eichel and Pietrangelo and so on. But in the end, they improved by getting those guys, and they made room for them just by flat out essentially cutting big salaries and finding takers for them. That's the other thing. In both cases, they did not have to throw in a sweetener. They just gave away a good player with a year or two to run on his contract to another team.
Bruce, Akey.
Akey. Breaky hard.
Akey. All right. What do you think? What did you find out about him? You wrote the post on him. What do you say?
I did. I think I found my favorite profile written on him by Scott Wheeler of The Athletic, a very excellent prospect reporter. And he says, a top player on a top team in the OHL this year, Akey is a beautiful flowing skater with plus-level mobility in all four directions. He can transition pucks up ice, join in transition, walk the line, and fall back onto his heels and edges when he needs to. I like him defending the rush where he uses his feet and stick to manage gaps and steer opposing carriers. I like the way he sees the ice and joins the offense. He can run a power play, likes to make himself available as a shot option at 5-on-5. His game defensively does lack a little polish and attention to detail at times. There's a lot to work with, and his ranking here is an indicator of the strength of this draft. He's a firm second round talent for me. And he ranked him at number 60. The Oilers got him right around that same spot at number 56. And almost all the draft rankings had him right in the second round, between 32 and 65 with one exception. So, right in the second round, the Oilers got, a solid, bet for what they got. To me, reading this, the beautiful skater part sounds great. I mean, a lot of his, he sounds kind of like a 18-year-old version of Tyson Barrie with some of the stuff they're describing here. But that's not the worst thing. 6 foot, 173 pounds. And that's the thing, as a defenseman at that size, you have to be, not only have excellent edge work and all, the skating skills, which apparently he has, but there's also, ability to read play and the discipline to get, inside of the opposing player is essential for a smaller defender. The good news is that, he's 18 years old. He's got 2 more full years at Barrie. He had it last year. He had a good first half, a less good second half. And what happened was Barrie brought in Brant Clark, the hotshot prospect of the Los Angeles Kings, who they got at the trade deadline in January. And at the halfway point, they got him exactly halfway through the season, 33 games in out of 66. And at that point, Akey had 28 points. And then in the back half of the season, he had only 19 points. And that's because Clark basically pushed him off the power play. And, that's a top 10 overall draft pick, Brent Clark, one who's trending very positively and who was 20 years old, not 18. So it's not exactly a slight on Akey that they went out and brought in someone even better to run their power play. It just means, A, that he probably got a chance to learn a little bit off of Brent Clark. And now Clark will be on his way to the NHL. Almost surely he's going to wind up directly in Los Angeles. And when he does, guess what? That first power play slot opens back up again, and Akey will be a big minutes player for his team in the OHL in this year and next. He's 2 years before they even have to think about him turning pro, because he's not a late birthday. He's a February of 05. So he'll turn pro in the fall of 25. And so he's, a good prospect in the, in a good place, but in terms of having any impact on the NHL, years away.
Yeah, if he was a bigger guy, he'd obviously be taken in the first round, I think. Probably. Yes. Like if he was 6'2", 220, like this.
And could skate like that, yeah.
Yeah, obviously, but he's not. Just a few comments on the Kostin Yamamoto deal. This from, here's Mark Spector of Sportsnet. He says, massive disappointment for Yamamoto, moving from cup contender to 24th place Detroit. And he quotes a friend of the player saying, yes, this hurts. Mm-hmm. Detroit could buy out Yamamoto or keep him at $3.1 million. Rights to Kostin may have been Yzerman's goal. That's what Spector said. And here's from Mo Sarda, who goes by Wheaton Oil, and he's a pretty sharp fan. So I usually pay attention to what he says. He says, mm-hmm. quote, I'm pretty impressed that the Oilers managed to clear cap space without taking anything back or giving up a draft pick. I like Yamamoto, but the Oilers needed an upgrade there. Now we'll have to see what they do with the cap room. As for Kostin, I also liked him, but the risk with him was that they'd pay him too much for too long, banking on a repeat of him shooting 19.6%. Seems like they were pretty far apart in negotiations, and you can get yourself in trouble tying limited cap to these bottom 6 guys. Mm-hmm. That's solid analysis by Mo. I think your feelings about this particular trade, your analysis of this trade, comes down to how much you valued Kostin, and thought he could be a really contributing player for the Oilers going forward. I think I have at the higher end of valuation for Kostin. So because of that, I'm less keen about this whole thing. I would have actually considered buying out Foegele in order to keep a player like Kostin, and maybe not maybe at 2
Well,
million, but if you could, get it lower than that, get him signed for 2 years, move out Fogel for nothing, and I'm not convinced that Warren Fogel's going to be a better player than the next 2 years than Klim Kostin. I didn't see
right.
that. Warren Fogel was really good though. That said,
Mhm.
Warren Fogel was really good. So it's not like I'm keen to get rid of him either. I guess this is the situation you have when you're a good team. The final thing I'd say about Yamamoto, or one more thing I'd say about Yamamoto, is that in terms of moving him, Bruce, we did raise injuries, but it's also the case that in every single season, he was significantly weaker as a two-way player in the playoffs than he had been in the regular season. And this was 4 years running, I believe. Yeah, 4 years running where we saw this same trend. This isn't something that you can shake off lightly in terms of evaluating the player. If let's say you're a big Yamamoto booster, that matters a lot. And the fact that he and is actually his worst two-way playoff performance came this year in the playoffs. He just wasn't a good player when the chips were down. He did make the odd scoring play, but he just didn't get it done. And for that reason, I think really that's why he's being moved as much as anything. I think if he had come up big in the playoffs this year, Bruce, he'd still be an Edmonton Oiler despite a weak regular season. But because he didn't, that's why he's not. That's why he was moved fundamentally.
Yeah, well, the quick and dirty stat that I have here, which is plus minus, and we could go into real 5-on-5 goals, and it probably wouldn't show a lot different because he's not a player who plays a ton in high leverage empty net situations, for example. But he was plus in his 244 NHL games. He was plus 29 in the regular season. So basically, that's 3 full seasons at plus 10 per season. And in the postseason, he played 34 games and he was minus 16. So, I mean, that's a huge difference. And, you can just, if you want to just put down the plus minus stat and say it means nothing, then okay, let it mean nothing to you. To me, it means that he, the Oilers got outscored when he was on the ice in the games that mattered most. And to my eye, he was losing puck battles, and the bigger guys were, and during the season, he would win some of those battles by having, an elevated, what the announcers call battle level, compete level, but in the playoffs, when sort of everybody is amped up, you could see it. Like it looked like boy against men at times with him. And I hate to say it because I like the player and I like what he brings out there, but he was maybe a little diminished by injury as well. And as the playoffs wound down, he was really no help to Edmonton. Sadly. And I wish him well. I wish them all well. All 3 of the guys that we mentioned, 3 young players that are heading elsewhere.
So let's see, what's this guy's Chris Johnson. Chris Johnson of TSN was just on talking about the Oilers moving out cap space, talking with Pierre Lebrun, and Johnson says, quote, "It's natural for us to connect the dots here with Connor Brown. I think you'll see a likely signing, a low dollar deal, perhaps with some performance bonuses. I would say the Oilers are in the driver's seat to get that contract done." Boom. So that's really interesting. That's what we were referencing, the possibility that to me makes it makes things a lot sweeter if this is the case. And we've heard back and forth, like earlier in the week, Stauffer and Sarah Volley were talking. It didn't sound like it was going to, and Holland was saying, well, this bonus money that we'd have to pay next year, we still have to pay it. And it's significant.
No, he's right.
And he's right about that. But this sounds like reporter Chris Johnson of TSN knows something, has heard something. So we'll see about that.
Yeah, well, let's say he gets a $1 million contract with $2 million in bonuses. They're paying him essentially, $2 million easily attainable bonuses. They're paying him what they paid Yamamoto, but only $1 million of it is coming out of this year's cap where they're really crunched. Next year they do have a a contract or two that are actually coming off the books at the end of the season. Plus, they'll have what's expected to be maybe a $5 million boost in the salary cap. And I'm with Holland in the sense that, they still have to account for it next year. And it's not like you can spend that $5 million 5 times. You can only get it once. But that would be a way to boost the team in 23-24 under very difficult salary restraints.
All right. Final thoughts? Anything to add?
Geez, I don't know. My favorite moment of the draft was Adam Fantilli wearing a vest that had all the names of all the people in his life that had helped him get to that point. That was very cool. On the back of his vest, it had it all scripted up with top to bottom names of parents, grandparents, coaches. That was a classy thing that I've never seen before. And otherwise, that first round, David, it was just interminable. It was 4 hours to make 32 picks, none of them belonging to the Oilers, with no trades, nothing going on. And I wasn't a big fan of the coverage either, to tell you the truth. I miss the days of Bob McKenzie covering the draft, man. Oh, man, I just haven't got his equal on Sportsnet or whatever merger between the Canadian-American coverage that they do for these drafts anymore. So anyway, on to bigger and better things, and then on tomorrow to qualifying offers. Klim Kostin's off the books, so they got 5 other RFAs, and I'm assuming they're going to just qualify all of them and then carry on with negotiations. So I would be happy to hear of an Evan Bouchard resolution sooner than later, though.
Well, I'm starting to think we are going to hear about a Connor Brown signing, Bruce. I mean, that's fairly strongly worded. Inside, it's not like insiders are always right. They sometimes get it wrong. But that sounded fairly fairly promising. Connor Brown is coming off a knee injury. He was saying to Luke Gazdick that it's in the last month, it's really responded well and it's really felt good, his knee. So we'll see.
Bad one, because he only played 4 games and he was out for the season in October.
Yeah.
So if it's only starting to respond now, but mind you, it's an ACL, right? Same thing that wrecked Andre Sekera.
Yeah.
It can, those ones do take 6 to 9 to even 12 months to come off. So it's certainly good news if he's feeling better. And the Oilers, I mean, I heard, I'm not sure if it was a quote from Holland or attributed to Holland, that they wouldn't even be in the market on Saturday, that they'll be shopping on Sunday when they see what's left over, because the big money deals will go down on Saturday. Well, they'd make an exception for Connor Brown. If they can announce such a deal as that, they would probably do it Saturday. Yeah.
He is an interesting player. Bruce, let's leave it there, and we'll talk again soon, I'm sure. And in the meantime, thanks for talking.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everyone.
And in the meantime, and in between times, this has been another edition of the Cult of Hockey podcast.